I'm not 100% sure. Couldn't find confirmation on this, but I think it comes from the academic world and academic symposiums, conferences, where researchers would submit their papers that they've been writing on about their research to the symposiums to present their research at the conferences, basically. So in terms of tech conferences, usually a tech conference will open a call for papers, and that's basically a call for people to apply to come and speak at the conference. So applying to the CFP is how you get the opportunity to speak at KubeCon. And there are several different types of talks that you can give at KubeCons. There are panels where it's several members. Usually there's like a moderator and you're all talking about a specific topic, but there often aren't slides. It's just kind of a conversation between a panel of experts to talk.
Thank you everyone for joining us on this Cloud Native FM podcast. And if you talk about, or if you're planning to submit a CFP that is legitimate on 17th of December and is closing on, the time is very short, as we all are procrastinators, we used to think doing lately. So this is a wonderful discussion around today on how to write some CFP that can be accepted with this KubeCon, as we all try to level our best to try to speak at KubeCon. And tonight is my privilege and honor that I have a guest who have a wonderful community background and a lot of the work. I think I am really a super fan of all of our wonderful work for the open source communities and the Kubernetes and the cloud native. So thank you very much, Kaslin Fields. He is a developer advocate at Google, and thanks for joining me today on the podcast. Introduce yourself to my audience and start the proceeding.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be talking to folks today about the KubeCon CFP. I feel like it's a really important thing to talk about. So a little more background on myself first, though. I am, like you said, a developer advocate at Google Cloud, where I focus on Google Kubernetes Engine and also open source Kubernetes. I'm a member of we just named ourselves the Marketing Council, the group who helped to run the contributor comms sub-project of SIG Contribex. So that's the special interest group for contributor experience in the Kubernetes open source project. I also help with a variety of other things around the open source project, mainly relating to contributor experience. My goal basically is to make sure that contributing to Kubernetes is a fun and inclusive and welcoming experience, and that we're doing work to help the world know what wonderful work the contributors on Kubernetes are doing.
Yes, absolutely. And that's part of the living in the open source community. You met a lot of the folks from a lot of the different different countries, different companies, different origins, different cultures, and different languages. So that's a wonderful story to be a part of the open source community. And if you're a part of the Kubernetes community, then you meet so many folks from around the world, because it's a gigantic community, and all of the wonderful people always. I have chat everyone from the Kubernetes community. They're always welcoming and love to talk about the Kubernetes project and the KubeCon or the Cloud Native Con, and wonderful community. I think I love to be involved in that community, love to be a part of it. And who people who are listening to us, go join the Slack channel for the Kubernetes. You always find a passionate and warm welcoming people and they always help you in getting started with Kubernetes, or you have stuck doing it along the road. So wonderful people and wonderful community to get involved with. I highly recommend to join the Kubernetes Slack, anyone who's watching this podcast. And before we jump into the CFP, tell us about your experience in the Google and Kubernetes. How long you've been in there, and do you enjoy that work in the Google at this moment of time?
Oh yeah. So I started my career in January of 2014, I guess, is when I started working in technology. And then I started working with Google in December of 2019. So I've been with Google for 2 years now. And I started working with containers way back in like 2015, 2014, really, because I had a mentor at the time who was really interested in containers. It wasn't part of my work at that point, but I just had this mentor, this friend who was really excited about container technology and wanted to tell people about it. And I was new and wanted to learn new things. So I started learning about containers, and that is where my career has gone from there. Is I just started diving deeper and deeper into containers, saw that it was a technology that a lot of people were getting involved with. So I started getting involved with them. And then as Kubernetes became more and more popular, it was first released in June of 2014, but I didn't really get involved with it until maybe 2017. And I didn't really start contributing until like last year, 2020, maybe the end of 2019. So that's kind of been my journey, as I got involved with containers early on and then started picking up Kubernetes, and finally I'm part of the community. And I guess we'll go over my experience with KubeCon itself here in a minute.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that's my next question actually, because you have been a part of the KubeCon for a very long time, and the people who are listening to this podcast might be relatively new, or they haven't gone to the KubeCon and haven't experienced this wonderful experience of it. So tell us about the KubeCon experience. And because I used to call it as the ITF Olympics. There is, when you look at the CNCF dashboard, it's look like Olympics games, like there are different games and people are participating in it. So tell us about the KubeCon, your experience been so far.
Yeah, so KubeCon is one of the largest tech conferences. It's the largest in the cloud native space, I think. I'm not 100% sure of that, but pretty sure it's definitely up there. And KubeCon has been going on since 2014 or 2015, like very soon after the project itself was born. But the first KubeCons were very, very small. I didn't go to my first one until 2016, which was in Seattle, and it was in the hotel near the convention center, not the convention center, because it wasn't big enough to warrant the convention center at that time. But but these days, the last 2 years, of course, KubeCon has been fully virtual, and the last one that we had, which was KubeCon North America 2021, was a hybrid event. It was both virtual and in person in LA. And the last few virtual events, we've had upwards of 20,000 attendees, largely, of course, online. With this last one, we had a few thousand person as well. So this is a very, very large event. It's a great opportunity to communicate, like thinking about the audience, who you're talking with at KubeCon, who goes to KubeCon. Should you go to KubeCon? Maybe. A lot of the folks who go to KubeCon are contributors to open source Kubernetes, or end users, people who work at companies or work in roles where they are going to have to use Kubernetes or are currently using Kubernetes. And you'll find folks who work in all sorts of different roles, not just developers or infrastructure engineers, but also people who are program managers, folks in marketing and sales come to these conferences to better understand the technologies that they have to work with every day, and also students. So you'll find a huge variety of people in different roles. And my personal experience with KubeCon, I spoke in my first one in 2018, I think, in Seattle. I had been very involved with meetup groups and local communities. So I ran a panel about open source cloud native communities. I later became an ambassador for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is the nonprofit organization that helps to manage Kubernetes and many other cloud native open source projects. And they're the ones that run this conference. It's technically KubeCon Cloud Native Con, not that anyone ever calls it that, but it's really about all kinds of cloud native technology. So since then I've spoken, what did I say, 9 times at 6 different KubeCons. I'm currently wearing my track host sweatshirt from our last KubeCon in LA. I've also served as a CFP reviewer and as a track chair for the community track.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a great experience because I like to talk to people. I want to talk to people. When the companies work with, there are 400-500 different people are working on the same company. Then I want to go to each desk of the people. What you are trying to do? What are you working at? what are the testing doing, what the marketing doing, try to do. I want to think about what are the other team try to do so I can align my career as well. I want to talk to these people. And that conference is actually give you that flavor. Because if you want to talk to these Google people or Red Hat peoples or the other open source projects that are popping up, that's nearly a 2 or 3 year old open source project, and you want to meet those people, how they came up with these ideas, that is a KubeCon experience you can get it talking to these people, and these people give you the feedback. And so you better align your next year for the roadmap. What are you thinking about? Because every time KubeCon give us a new terminology, like the first time they come up, we call the GitOps, then we have a service mesh terminology going up, and then this year is actually the supply chain conference. Supply chain security is popping up every one of single one of the person mind. So I think the KubeCon is actually a wonderful experience. I haven't go to, but it's my wonderful. It's my dream to meet these people in person. And virtually, the in person meeting is one of the best experience you can get for. But before we're doing that, I started doing the Cloud Native FM podcast so I can meet these awesome people and talk to their ideas, what they are doing, how they spend their life, and what are you doing with the community works, because that's love. The community works is really help you and you give you the smile on the face because people are struggling with some ideas or terminology and you help them and they get out of this problem, and that's give you the wonderful experience, wonderful smile on your face. You're able to help other people a lot, and you've been into this space, you helping people a lot. I seen you are writing a blog post about how to write the CFP for the KubeCon, and that's our topic of today's discussion. So tell us, to my viewers who never been submit a CFP before, and what are the things they try to write. And let's say if they are the different part of the domain, like some of the tester, some of developer, or infrastructure engineer, and might be there are some marketing members who get involved with this Kubernetes for might be 3 or 4 years. So tell us about all these audience, how to write the CFP, and what is
Yeah.
criteria for submitting the CFP.
Yeah. So a CFP, first to start off, what is a CFP? Stands for Call for Papers. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, couldn't find confirmation on this, but I think it comes from the academic world and academic symposiums, conferences, where researchers would submit their papers that they've been writing on about their research to the symposiums to present their research at the conferences, basically. So in terms of tech conferences, usually a tech conference will open a call for papers, and that's basically a call for people to apply to come and speak at the conference. So applying to the CFP is how you get the opportunity to speak at KubeCon. And there are several different types of talks that you can give at KubeCons. There are panels where it's several members. Usually there's like a moderator and you're all talking about a specific topic, but there often aren't slides. It's just kind of a conversation between a panel of experts to talk about that topic. There's also solo presentations, which is probably what we think about most with tech presentations. That's like a 35-minute presentation, up to 2 speakers about some topic, usually involves slides, sometimes involves demos. I saw one last year in LA that had actual hardware on the stage for a demo, which was really cool because it was like a machine learning, AI, and like edge. So smaller technology that you would work with on site that needs to connect to the cloud type of thing. So all sorts of demos are possible in solo presentations. There's also this dual presentation concept, which I guess is just for 2 speakers on a presentation, but they have a different title for it apparently. And then there's lightning talks. Yay, I'm so excited that they're bringing those back. There have been past years where they didn't have lightning talks, but a lightning talk is a 5-minute presentation. Those are really great for communicating a very quick idea, something that you're working on that you can communicate in 5 minutes, or personal experiences. I've also heard some really great lightning talks about people's journey into tech. Like I heard someone who went through a coding school talk about how they got involved in tech in a lightning talk at one KubeCon. And then there are tutorials that they're going to have at KubeCon EU in 2022. And a tutorial is a 90-minute in-depth hands-on presentation, 1 to 5 speakers, where you're helping a group actually go through a hands-on activity. That will be an interesting one. I've never done one of those at KubeCon, despite my 9 things that I've done. So that's kind of the basics of what types of presentations you can give at KubeCon. And there's a few rules that you have to follow if you want to apply to present at KubeCon. You can submit up to 2 submissions for any of those different types of sessions that I mentioned, but you can only be accepted to speak at most 2. And one of those basically can be a panel, and one of those can be any of those other things that I talked about. So you can submit 2 solo presentations, for example, but only one of those would be accepted. If you submit a solo presentation and a panel, then you could potentially be accepted to speak at both. And other rules, no repeats. If you've given the talk before at KubeCon, then it probably won't be accepted. Any platforms or tools you're describing need to be open source. This is not a conference to... Oh, did I lose you for a second?
No.
Okay, good. It's not a conference to like promote Microsoft technologies or Google technologies or any other proprietary technologies. This is about open source. So make sure that your talk will be about any open source contributing or communities or what have you. And yeah, I think that's all of the, I have in my blog post, I'm referencing to the side here, my blog post on the rules. So that's kind of the basics of the KubeCon CFP.
Yes, absolutely. And the people who are listening to the talk, they can grab the link from the YouTube and understand on the blog post what is the way to write the CFP for. And on the topic of that is people are try to think about why it is important to submit a CFP for the KubeCon or talks at the KubeCon. And one of the things might be is that you can, if you get the opportunity to talk at the KubeCon, is one of the way you can verify your knowledge, because it's really important in 2022 to test your knowledge, because one of the things you are developing might be how other people reflect to those your innovations, and might be you're doing something, and that's really important for the people to use that in efficient way, because if the one of the open source project is no one using it, we'll lose the value out of it. The open source is all about giving the feedback from the user and help those features baked into the open source projects. So that's why the open source model is really exponential growth, because anybody can contribute to the open repository, and also everybody can criticize to that repository, and everyone can give the feedback on that repository. And that's really a talk is about that, because some of the folks are doing out of the box things that the rest of the community don't understand it. And you can go to the KubeCon and tell your ideas, innovation, that you are building some ARM devices, you are building some Argo CD tooling, or Helm charts, or Kubernetes, or policy engines. There are so much things into it. So I think that's the important way of understanding why it is important to go for applying a talk in the KubeCon. So also, Kaslin, your views is absolutely vital for the audience, why it is important to go for the conferences and talk about these things.
Yes. So like you said, KubeCon is a great place to learn about what's trending, what's coming up in the open source cloud native community. A lot of businesses send people there because they want to use the technologies in the space. Maybe they're already using Kubernetes, maybe they're planning to start using Kubernetes, and they need to understand more about the ecosystem and what's happening in that space. They need confirmation that it's a technology that's going to continue to grow and continue to suit their needs, and confirmation that the community is listening to them, basically. That's something that KubeCon gives a lot of the folks that are coming here, is that this community is not static. It's not following some proprietary agenda. It's listening to its users and trying to adapt to their needs. So a lot of different types of topics are a great fit for KubeCon. If you want to talk to other contributors, say you're working on some project within the CNCF and your project wants to recruit new folks to work on it, and you also want to communicate what you're working on and make sure that more people will start using it, Cloud Native Con, KubeCon is a great place for that kind of messaging. Of course, new updates that are going on in Kubernetes. Each SIG usually has a maintainer track session. So by the way, something I didn't mention earlier is the maintainer track at KubeCon. So there's this whole CFP that's going on, and I mentioned all of those different types of talks you can give and you can submit to speak at KubeCon. Maintainer track is actually a totally different process that is run by the CNCF, and it's only open to the projects that are part of the CNCF. So if you're part of one of those projects, you may have an opportunity to talk about your project specifically through the maintainer track. But if you're not, if you're, say, an end user, you want to share your experience trying to adopt one of these technologies, and maybe it went kind of sideways at times, but hopefully you had a little bit of success. They love to see talks by end users. There are also talks, of course, in the community track, like I mentioned. There are different tracks for different topics. There's a track for security. There's a track for networking. So it's all sorts of members of the community, whether they work on these technologies as contributors, whether they work with these technologies as end users, even students who are just getting started. Folks just come to KubeCon to share their experiences that might help other people who are going through similar things with these technologies, basically.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And might be, I think that one of the good things about the KubeCon is that you're working on might be the service mesh or GitOps in your company. And when you go to the conference and talk about these things, one of the maintainers are really approaches to you, like the community, like Linkerd, that the service mesh creator, they really approaches to you and talk us about how you use the Linkerd. And then you might be the part of that open source project as well. And that's give you the extra boost to your CV, because now you are the part of that community that are building these open source technology and millions of other using it. So that's another exposure that I only get from the KubeCon. When you talk, if you listen to KubeCon or going to virtually or in person, that's another good thing. In 2019, I go to watch the session on the virtually, and then I find folks from the different community, and I'm now the part of that community for the last 2-3 years. So that's another good news. And also I see in the KubeCon a lot of the people doing some community stuff, like somebody managing the cloud native groups, like I'm managing the cloud native Islamabad.
Mm-hmm.
So they can talk about how they're managing the cloud native groups and what the idea was, what are the people are coming to talks there. So tell us, is it another good way of submitting talk there if you're just running the meetup groups in your local community?
Where else are you going to have the opportunity to talk to other people who are running community groups like you are? So a lot of folks who run community groups like you're doing do attend KubeCon, and often there are a lot of folks there who are interested in content that can help them run their groups more effectively. So things like you were talking about, like what types of topics are popular in your groups. The first session that I ran at a KubeCon was a panel of folks who run community groups, just talking about that experience. What is it like? Who comes to these groups? Which is also interesting for folks in other roles at other companies like marketing groups, some of which come to KubeCon. So there's a variety of reasons that community experiences are valued as part of KubeCon. And I want to go into some other things that I talked about in the blog post. Since we're coming up on the CFP deadline here, I thought maybe we should go over some of the top information that you need to put into your proposal.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So in my blog post, I go over some of the sections of the application, basically, that I think are the most important for you to be aware of and be ready to fill out for whatever your idea may be. One of them is the session description, of course, and the session description in the application is exactly what will go onto the schedule if your session gets accepted. So imagine someone out there is reading through the schedule, looking for sessions that they want to attend. This is your chance to communicate to them what your idea is and why they should come to your talk. So the session description is very important, and remember to write it as if someone who might potentially come to your talk was reading it. But that's a bit strange to think about at this stage, because you're not even sure if you're going to be accepted yet. So you might have things that you want to communicate just to the CFP reviewers. So the timeline of the CFP, we're going to finish the submission segment of our current CFP process on December 17th. And then it's going to go into a cycle of reviews where different groups, experts in the area, as well as the track chairs who are experts in both the area and KubeCon, and then the chairs actually of the whole conference will review the sessions and determine which ones will be part of the final schedule. So what if you want to communicate specifically to those people, not necessarily to the people who are going to attend your talk, but to the people who are considering whether or not they will pick your talk? That is what the benefits to the ecosystem section is for. That's where you have a chance to communicate directly with the judges. The public will never see this, but you can say, hey, this talk is going to be really great. Look at this blog post that I did before on this topic. Look at this GitHub repo that I made about this topic. I think this will really benefit the folks who are attending KubeCon, because contributors to Kubernetes or to CNCF open source projects will value the process that I created for this project or something like that. Communicating how you think this will benefit some segment of the KubeCon audience, and be very specific, because the judges want to see that this will be a valuable session for the folks attending KubeCon. And I mentioned like blog posts, GitHub repos, absolutely add any supplemental materials about your topic that you possibly can. So those are like my top 3 things in the application. Make sure that you're ready to fill those out, and that you have an idea of what you want to put into them.
Yes, absolutely. And also on the title of the topic, like it's really difficult for the at this moment of
Really
time.
hard.
What is the title of the topic? Because it's the title of the topic actually reflects the whole idea of the conversation, and it's difficult for me to write the title of the topic. So to suggest some tips and tricks how to write the title of the talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so hard. I highly recommend, the way that I think about the title of the topic, the title of the talk, is that it's kind of an extension of your session description. Kind of a, what's the right word here? A concentration of the information that you're trying to convey in your session description. And you also want it to be eye-catching. Think of it a little bit like a newspaper headline. You don't want to be sensationalist. You don't want to say something that's not true, or that misleads people. But you do want to catch their attention and communicate what is going to be in your session. Sometimes folks make little jokes with song titles or references to popular culture. But also remember that KubeCon is a global audience. So if you reference something that might not be popular in other countries, it might not go as well as you might think. So like I said, kind of condensing what's happening in your session description, telling people exactly what your session is going to be about, while, keeping it within a short title.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that if a lot of the folks who are watching this or listening this podcast, if they have to write out some of the blog posts in future, it's really easier for them to submit a talk there, because they already know how to write the blog post, and then they actually shrink down the blog post into the CFP submission. So that's easier. But if folks never ever write a blog post before, it's really difficult for them to do these kind of, and that audience is actually for the students who are wanting to participate in the KubeCon. They never submit a blog post, but they want to speak at the KubeCon as a student. So that's really difficult. So tell us about their students. What should they do to submit to CFP?
Yeah. There are a lot of ways to prepare to submit to a CFP, and KubeCon is a huge one. Like we said, it's kind of the Olympics of this area, and you might not get accepted the first time. That is a-okay. I didn't. I applied to KubeCon at least once or twice before I actually got accepted. Sometimes you apply more than that to get accepted. Because it's a very, very tough competition. So tough that there is actually a separate conference that happens right before this conference, just made up of talks that didn't get accepted to KubeCon, because that many great talks just don't get accepted because there's just so few slots. So don't feel bad if you ever don't get accepted. But how you prepare to be ready for something like this. One thing, like we said, is of course writing blog posts. Creating any materials about your topic is going to help your topic be stronger and also help with your communication skills about that topic. And communicating, public speaking is always a challenge. It's a top fear for a lot of people. So it's always helpful to get some experience doing that in a smaller, more friendly, perhaps, well, KubeCon is very friendly, but that you might perceive as more friendly, smaller groups. So groups that you can present your idea to before you submit it to KubeCon might be your coworkers or maybe your classmates if you're still a student in school. And beyond that, going into more public spaces, things like local meetup groups or maybe even podcasts. Groups that try to address a similar community but are maybe smaller local groups are great places to try out ideas that you want to turn into talks for a very large conference like KubeCon. And like I said, if your talk does not get accepted the first time, try again. Keep iterating on it. Keep molding it into what you think it needs to be. And you can always resubmit at the next KubeCon, which will be, there's 2 to 3 per year. We've recently brought back the KubeCon China. And then there are the Kubernetes community days as well, which are more local events that are kind of based on this type of audience and these types of topics as well.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I have submitted in 2018 and 2019, and both of the time I rejected there. Then in 2020, I never submitted there. I think about what it is, and then I talk to people on the meetup, and they come up with the new ideas of what are the talks they in the meetups they deliver. Then I grab the idea that this is a way to submit it. This is a way to talk into the people. So I learn from there. So I think that's another approach. And if you want to fail twice, go do your homework, talk to people who submit the talks there, or even go to the KubeCon CNCF YouTube channel and look at those talks, at least 10 or 5 talks, how people prepare those talks for it and how they submit the title and these kind of things. And all these are in the playlist in the YouTube channel. So grab a link here, it's available, and check those before submitting that, because that's give you the idea that the topic is already delivered. Let's go something else, because these are not submitted, because this is already been a part of the previous KubeCon. And KubeCon is not all about iterating the same stuff. We want to do new stuff. So before submitting the talk, go check with these 229. That's very long, but at least you check out the title of this session and tell us what the new idea is up. Talk to even supply chain security, that's relatively new, or JTOPS or service mesh. These are relatively new topics that have been popping over the last 3 years. So that's give you the edge as well by submitting there. So
yeah.
Before I let you go, we have passed the 30 minutes. So tell us about your coming up, the Christmas party and the New Year party.
Yeah.
And have you started the shopping, or you have already done the shopping? What's
Hopefully I'm mostly done. But for contributors to Kubernetes, there is the contributor celebration coming up next week as we are recording this, right around the close of the KubeCon CFP, actually. Usually at the end of the year, the Kubernetes contributor community, after our last release of the year, 1.23, by the way, Kubernetes version 1.23 just launched a few days ago. I think it was actually literally yesterday as we're recording this, but
yes.
So after the last launch of the year, we usually just have this little celebration where we do fun activities. The community gets together. It's a nice opportunity to network and meet other people in the community and just generally have some fun. We also announce some contributor awards. Folks who have really done a great job of contributing to the Kubernetes community over the last year. We'll give out some awards to recognize their work and do fun things like play games. And we had a bake-off last year, which I think we're going to have again. So that's going to be December 16th through the 19th. And there's a schedule up. I'll try to get you the link and make sure that we can post it on the video. Yes. So yeah, and like you said, I also wanted to reiterate, if you want to submit a talk to KubeCon, be sure to check out some past talks in a similar area. And also on my blog post, I have a list of sessions that are just about KubeCon CFP tips, which might be good resources for you.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a wonderful resource. That's a tons of congratulations on putting this up, because we haven't had anything available still your blog posts to talk about what is CFP, because everyone is talking about go to the KubeCon, but how to go it, there is nothing there. So thank you very much for putting this stuff as well. So a final question from my side, what is your plan for 2022?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I'm a member of the contributor comms. We also call ourselves the upstream marketing group within contributor experience. I'm sure that we'll be doing lots of cool stuff in the new year. We've had a lot of new folks join us recently, which I've been really excited about. We've recently changed the way that the roles within our group work. So I'm sure that we'll be doing some more work on how we manage that group's work, basically. And we manage the Kate's contributors Twitter account. And we've got some work to do on the automation for how that works. So we'll be working on some of that in the new year, I'm sure. And we also occasionally write blog posts, such as those. We have like a series where we interview SIG chairs, different special interest groups within Kubernetes, and talk about their work. So we'll probably do some of that. And there are a variety of communications, especially with the releases next year. 1.24 is going to be a really, really big release. 1.25 I'm sure will too, but 1.24 is especially challenging in terms of communications because it's going to involve most likely the removal of dockershim. Yeah. So if you're not familiar with the controversy around dockershim and Kubernetes, please look at our FAQ, and there's an existing blog post about what that means and what's happening. It's not really that Docker's, a lot of people think that immediately that it's like Kubernetes is removing support for Docker. That's not what's happening. We're removing support for this component of Kubernetes that made it work more smoothly with kind of, I don't know how to describe the Docker containers right, but Docker basically uses the container runtime of containerd, and that is the part that Kubernetes actually needs in order to run your container. So we're just changing the way that Kubernetes interacts with the actual runtime that your Docker containers use. So look at the FAQ for all of the details. But that's some of the stuff that's coming up in the new year that's very exciting that we'll be working on.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And the alpha release is actually out for the dockershim. I think it's been released in Thursday, one day before we are recording the podcast. So that's really everybody is talking about. We end the year in 2020 with this announcement: is Docker is being deprecated, and we end the year 2021 again with the dockershim is finally removed. So these 2 years is actually a very wonderful story for the people. Even these dockershim things, a lot of the people go out and check how actually Docker works, because some of the people don't ever understand how the Docker works itself. And then
which is understandable.
Yes, because it's hiding the complexity from us. And after the shim come up, people are actually looking at the architecture where the dockershim is actually. And then it tell not Docker removing, but it's the extra piece, the glue code that we call it.
Right.
That
exactly.
we are removing, the glue code or dependency, because we are not being a part of the very hard dependency. We have interfaces like CRI, CNI, CSI. So it's not a stuff changing, but it's going to be a lot of communication hurdles might be doing later down the road, because everybody communicating the other way of thinking about it. So,
so to be clear, you should be able to still create Docker containers using Docker, because it's a really great usability tool that allows you to create containers really easily. But those containers are containerd containers, and you just have to make sure Kubernetes is ready for running your containerd containers that you may be created through Docker.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Kubernetes is not a human; is a machine. He needs just containerd, not the UI of the Docker desktop. He's just using the containerd. So I think that's a
Right,
great
exactly.
that is a great move by the community. Actually, I really appreciate it because we want to have a not a dependency with any kind of things because
Exactly.
having a gigantic project like Kubernetes, if you depend on something else, is break the whole communication barrier because communication is hard in IT. That's I am struggling with the teams. Communication is really hard. A lot of the people don't want to share their ideas publicly, and a lot of the people do share, like us. But it's been a challenging from the Kubernetes community, but I think it's a right way to move on.
Yeah.
So
And containerd, by the way, is another CNCF project. So learn more about it at KubeCon.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I've done the podcast with Phil Estes from the Kubernetes container day maintainer.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll also have a link to that if you want to enjoy that podcast as well.
Definitely check that out.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kaslin Fields. Always been a wonderful talking to you today. And hopefully we'll catch you again in the next year. And I will catch you again in the Kubernetes contributor party coming up next week. We'll meet you again
Yay.
with there. And I hope everybody join us on that party. We have a wonderful networking there. Maybe tell us what you are more excited about in 2021 and what's your plan now for 2022. So thank you very much for joining and listening to the podcast. Hope to catch up you again for the next episode. Bye bye and take care of yourself.